Vocal minority. While Democrats are exerting their sizable majorities in the U.S. Congress, Iowa's 5th District Congressman Steve King is making the most of his Republican minority voice. A conversation with Congressman King on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Iowa Bankers Association for personal, business, and commercial needs. Iowa banks help Iowans reach their financial goals.
By Iowa's private colleges and universities, enrolling 25% of the total Iowa higher education enrollment and conferring 44% of the baccalaureate and 40% of the graduate degrees in the state. More information is available at www.thinkindependently.com.
The Iowa Hospital Association, supporting the missions and visions of Iowa's 117 community hospitals. The Iowa Hospital Association. We care about Iowa's health.
On statewide Iowa Public Television, this is the Friday, February 13th edition of Iowa Press. Here is Dean Borg.
The screen now. So far, there's not much evidence of change in relations between Democrats and Republicans in Congress, even as President Barack Obama calls for bipartisan cooperation in expediting economic stimulus legislation. His public statements are getting tougher, showing a bit of impatience. In fact, House Democrats passed the stimulus package without a single Republican aye vote. Representative King was among that Republican minority voting no, and he's in his 4th two-year term now, representing Western Iowa's 5th congressional district. In Congress, he's sitting on the Agriculture, Small Business, and Judiciary committees. Congressman King, welcome back to Iowa Press. It's been a while since you've been here.
It's been too long. I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you.
Nice to have you back. And across the table, Des Moines Register political columnist David Yepsen and Associated Press senior political writer Mike Glover.
Congressman, it wouldn't be an official Iowa Press show if we didn't talk a little politics, so we decided we'll just start with politics this time. Give us your take on what happened in 2008. It was a lousy year for Republicans. You lost seats in the legislature, in Congress, and the country elected a Democratic president. How come? What went wrong?
Well, there was an inertia at play, I think, to some degree over the last 10 or more years that Republicans didn't maintain the level of conviction that they had when they took over the majority in 1994. It diminished some. The convictions were there, but they were diminished in their fervor. And then, as we had an unpopular war in Iraq going on, and then also on September 19th was the day that Henry Paulson came to Congress and said, I insist that you give me a check for $700 billion and I'll figure out the best thing to do with it. We'll pick up this toxic debt. So even though the sky was starting to fall, he was running around claiming that it was, and it drove our agenda down where we didn't have anything going on that really gave the public confidence in Republicans. We've got a lot to earn back, Mike.
Then what do you have to do to fix it by 2010? Because you're right, you've got a lot of work to do and not a lot of time to do it. How do you fix it?
Well, first I just take us back to the bailout bill, that $700 billion bailout bill. That passed with Republican and Democrat votes. We had the ability at that point to stop that bailout vote. We could have stopped it with the Republican votes, and I don't think there would have been enough Democrats to support it. So now we've taken the stand that we are opposed to the stimulus package, put up 0 votes to pass it out of the House, and 11 Democrats voted with the Republicans to do that. That's at least a base to stand on, and it has energized the Republican base. They understand now that we do have a core of fiscal conservatives in Congress, and I was not very optimistic over the last Congress because I didn't think that we didn't have the spring in our step, we didn't find our convictions, and I'm seeing that now. We have mostly a new leadership team. They're ready to go out and carry this message outside of the Beltway, and I'm among them. I think we have to take it to the people. It isn't going to happen inside the Beltway.
Congressman, will you run for governor in 2010?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. It's something that, I have over the last few years worked across the state. I think I've said here in this program several years ago, my job was to stitch the 5th District to the rest of Iowa so it doesn't become the Eastern Nebraska District. And I have a job today that I very much enjoy. I'm eager to start every day, and I'm sorry to have to give up on each day. And yet there's a duty for me, I think, and it's a wonderful privilege to serve the people of this country and the state of Iowa, but I've made no decision, Dave.
Is it safe to say you're thinking about it or keeping your options open? How should we couch that?
Well, I think we can say that it would be foolish to foreclose options, and I think it'd be constructive, though, at this point, for me to say that our most important job right now is to bring together and reunify the Republican Party in this state. And I think with the leadership in the Iowa House and Senate, along with a new chairman in the party, we have the tools to do that, and I want to continue to support that before we start competing against each other.
Well, what about 2012 and beyond? I mean, one of the political dynamics that's going to happen in our state in 2010 is there'll be a census. In 2011, they redraw congressional district lines. Iowa will lose a member of Congress or down to 4. So does that make it more likely that you'll run for something in 2012 as opposed to 2010?
You know, it's something I have to look at. I really don't game it out that far. I do think it's very important for us to come together and win back at least one majority in the House so we have a voice on the redistricting here in the state. And I wouldn't necessarily concede that we lose a seat, although the numbers point in that direction and most of the scholarship says so. I want to count all the people like the Constitution says.
What about the political dynamic of the 2010 election? Is this going to be a year like 1934 in which the Democrats in hard economic times come off a successful election and then go on to continue their majorities? Or do you think it'll be more like a traditional election where the party in power loses seats? It's kind of an interesting dynamic in my estimation between hard times, which traditionally help Democrats, and yet the fact is a lot of those Obama voters are not going to be at the ballot box in 2010. How do you feel this?
Well, just to boil it down, it would be, am I an optimist or a political pessimist? And,
well, I just want your assessment more than anything.
and I assess it with that in light. And I believe that, and I've said this to the Republicans this week in the State House, I think that we will gain seats in 2010. I'm very confident that that's
in
the
the
case.
legislature.
In the legislature, in the Iowa legislature, and in Congress. Okay. And I say that for a number of reasons, but we have people that are coming out today that said they didn't want to commit themselves to a life of public service. Now their frustration's driving them. Our recruitment is better. They're seeing the cliff that we're being driven over economically, and they want to pull us back from that.
I want to talk about that economic cliff. President Obama is pushing frantically now for an economic stimulus package, in addition to the bailout package that you referred to earlier that's already been passed for financial institutions. Do you have the same sense of timing that it just is imperative that something be passed?
The short answer is no, but the main reason to that is that I think we're in an economic crisis. I think it's worse today than it was a month or 2 or 3 months ago. But I don't agree with the solutions that have been proposed by President Obama. Therefore, I don't want to rush off of that cliff because I think it is a huge mistake to commit ourselves to altogether. Bloomberg reported just this week that the congressional commitments on the bailout, if the stimulus is culminated and finally signed, $9.7 trillion in risk and exposure. That's enough to pay the mortgage, the home mortgages of 90% of the home mortgages in America. That's a huge chunk to bite off, and I think it's a wrong solution.
There are two things there. Timing. You don't think that timing is so imperative, and also getting the right thing. So what should the timing be, and what is the right thing to do?
Well, I offered some legislation that I think was right on the timing last fall. It was called the Rescue Act. And what it did is it suspended capital gains taxes on those who would invest in picking up toxic debt and also on U.S. capital that's stranded overseas. That would have put trillions of dollars into this economy. I'm still for that. I think the thing to do is immediately suspend capital gains taxes, bring those trillions of dollars into our economy. That's a stimulus package that will return. We are looking at, it would cost about $68 billion in lost revenue next year and $61 billion the following year. When we're talking about a $9.7 trillion package, we can suspend capital gains. We need to reform. We need to reform the Community Reinvestment Act. We need to privatize and capitalize, regulate, and then privatize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We need to dig into these finances and look at what went wrong, mark-to-market accounting and credit default swaps, and fix it. We haven't done anything to reform the mistakes that have been made, and Eisenhower said that you cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that created it.
Congressman, let's turn to a political question, but it's also a policy question, and that is there are those who argue that Barack Obama won the presidency by an easier vote since 1984 when Ronald Reagan got elected. In other words, he has the M word, the mandate. The country voted for him. Why shouldn't Congress go along with his initial proposals?
Well, we all run elections too, and we have an obligation to our constituents
But the point
as well.
being, everybody in America voted for him.
And okay, then we are living in a constitutional republic. It's a representative form of government, and our obligation is to lay out the principles that we believe in, take that case to the people within our constituents, our future constituents, ask them to hang their values on that framework, and I owe my constituents my best effort and my best judgment. And that's how we put together this constitutional republic, and that's why we have a separation
And
of powers.
is there a risk for Republicans in this? I mean, pretty clearly, the polls I've seen suggest that voters want, quote, something done. They may or may not support the stimulus package. They want Congress and the president to act. Are Republicans running the risk of being viewed as obstructionists, standing in the way of a solution?
We run that risk. I've heard it from Republicans. I've heard them say, we can't criticize President Obama because his approval ratings are so high. I think that's irresponsible to take a political position and hide behind a poll. We have to do what we believe in, and we have to take the risk. And I think you'll know that I haven't necessarily been risk averse, and I intend to continue that way. So.
Congressman, talk a little bit about tax cuts. The Democrats will criticize that position as saying Republicans, all they want to do is cut taxes. That's always their solution. Did it for 8 years, had a huge deficit. And particularly on a capital gains tax cut, that's just a break for the rich. So how do you respond to those arguments?
Well, the capital gains tax cut it puts the most money into the economy the quickest. There's nothing that can bring us around faster than just simply eliminating capital gains taxes. I do that for 2 years today. I didn't advocate going that far last October when I introduced that legislation. Today I would, because I think our economy has slid down some. But you cannot help the poor by punishing the rich. And we have to have investment capital in this country. That investment capital goes into the private sector, into the productive sector of the economy. We're growing the government sector of the economy instead, and I think that's where our mistake lies.
What about increasing food stamp benefits? Because some economists say that money turns right around. You put $1 in somebody's pocket that you're going to spend. It'll rattle around and create $1.73 worth of impact. What about that? Do you buy that?
Well, I don't. I'll say this: that I don't see that money being invested. It might be a short-term stimulus in the economy, just like the $150 billion stimulus package from about a year ago. But that's not real investment dollars.
Congressman, one more question about tax cuts. Why aren't Republicans talking about cutting the payroll tax, Social Security tax? Everybody pays that, including the people at the lowest wage levels. If the goal is to get money into the economy, why aren't we talking about cutting the payroll? Why aren't you Republicans talking about cutting payroll taxes for Social Security?
Well, actually, we do have legislation out there that would do that. Congressman Louis Gohmert from Texas has introduced legislation that would suspend everybody's payroll tax. He started out for a year, and he's backed it back to 2 months now. So that's something that is part of the discussion, and I'm confident that he will seek to put that on as an amendment. But the rules don't allow very many amendments to come to the floor, as you know.
One of the issues that you became known nationally for is immigration reform. You were a very prominent voice from a point of view on immigration reform. A, what happened to that issue? And B, do you continue to advocate for it?
I haven't changed my position, Mike, and what's happened is we had a presidential election where neither candidate wanted to talk about immigration. And so it didn't come up in the debates, it didn't come up in the speeches very much at all. It's still there, and I am the ranking member of the immigration subcommittee in the House, and so I do have to carry that banner, and I do so willingly, and I think it's a responsibility. I'm going to stand and defend the rule of law. And I don't intend to provide amnesty. There was a bill that would have legalized 557,000, and they brought that in kind of a late delivery of it. And I sat there alone and offered amendments for over 9 hours until finally everybody gave up and went home for the day. So I will stand on the rule of law. The record shows that, but I don't think that they're going to push that in the first couple of months of this administration. There's too much to do otherwise.
Right. In retrospect, was that a mistake on the part of Republicans to nominate a candidate who effectively took immigration away from you?
I think that the mistake was made when President Bush decided that he would support McCain and Kennedy's immigration legislation. That divided our party. The president gave that address was January 6th of 2004, if I remember right. And I remember I was on the phone with Karl Rove for 35 minutes the night before, and I pleaded with him, stop the president, don't let him give this speech, because it will split the Republican Party in two, and it'll erode our base, and it'll give them a chance to reach across to the other side and erode the rule of law. That's what happened, and I think that's when the mistake was made.
Do you sense that the immigration issue is losing some of its potency? We're told illegal immigration is down because of the economy. People just aren't coming here. The fence is up in some places and is working. Is it just lost its potency here?
I think it's lost some of its potency. The economy has made a difference. The enforcement has made a difference. I saw some data that's a little bit dated now, but from last August to the previous August, we had 1.3 million that self-deported, and that was a ratio of about 7 for every one that was deported through an act of law enforcement. There's that piece, and then the economy and the message in the South. But I think that it will keep coming back to us because we have so much lawlessness on the south side of the border. The Mexicans are very unstable, and it's spilling over on our side of the border, and I think that will be the next eruption of immigration.
How do you feel about the conduct of the federal government in the post-Phil raid?
Well, the raid had to be done. And if we're not willing to enforce the law, then those kind of things would go on and they would expand. So for those that were critical, the people that have been critical of the post-Phil raids have generally not been able to define how they would go about enforcing the law in circumstances like that. I think that ICE looked ahead and they covered a lot of the contingencies in that, and I think the law had to be enforced. So it was a good thing on the long run.
I want to expand Mike's question on immigration out to other social issues. You're known as a good social conservative. Abortion, objections to gay rights and gay marriage. Those issues didn't seem to have the relevance to voters this time that they have in past elections. Is that your sense of this too?
I think so, and part of it's because neither candidate advanced those issues. I think Sarah Palin reflected both of the issues, the abortion and the marriage issue. But I do also think that the public hasn't focused as much on abortion and on marriage. It's a broader topic now, and in fact, if you poll it, and I'm not much of a person to look at polls, they're interested in their economic well-being, and even pro-life people would put the abortion issue in the top 3, but not necessarily the top 1.
Fair point, but what do you do about it? I mean, do you just drop the issue and move on to something else? How do you reinvigorate some interest in the debate in those subjects?
Well, I think it's just important to articulate the principle that life begins at the instant of conception, and that we believe in the sanctity of human life, and carried by that argument. But I'm watching the Supreme Court pretty closely these days, and I think that we could be in a situation where President Obama could make 2 or 3 very liberal appointments, young liberal appointments to the Supreme Court, and that could end the activism that could be successful through the courts for probably my lifetime.
And
I'm very concerned about that.
You may not look a lot at polls. I suspect you look a lot at your district, which is one of the most rural congressional districts in the Congress. You now have a former Iowa governor who's Secretary of Agriculture. You're a conservative Republican. He's a liberal Democrat. What's your relationship with him?
It's actually been a good professional relationship with Governor Vilsack, and we served in the Iowa Senate together, and then I was in the Iowa Senate as he was elected to be governor. And throughout that period of time, then I went to Congress, and we continued a working relationship. I'll tell you this, that Tom Vilsack is a smart man, and he understands the policy. And even though he probably doesn't have a lot of agriculture experience, he's going to be able to, through his administrative skills, having been an administrator and a governor for 8 years, he will be able to adapt coming from a farm state like Iowa. So we'll work together like we have on these issues when we were in the Senate together, when he was a governor, when I'm in Congress, or as a state senator. It's a very good matchup for Iowa. And I had a conversation with he and Christie at the National Cathedral the day after the inauguration that I think has laid the framework. So.
And what do you want from him? Like I say, you represent one of the most rural districts in America. What do you want from this former Iowa governor?
I would say to Governor Vilsack that he has to be the clearest defender of corn-based ethanol in the country. We have to look to him to do that. Much of the administration is going to be looking at it the other way, finding another way to do renewable fuels. But there will be no ethanol if we can't if we can't have a healthy corn-based ethanol. It's not going to be cellulosic if we can't hold corn together, and we really need Tom Vilsack to defend it for us, and he can be the articulating voice in the cabinet.
Congressman, can Tom Vilsack, everybody talks about it's great that Tom Vilsack is the agriculture secretary, he can do a lot for Iowa. Can he really? If he comes off looking like he's playing favorites, like he's doing something for the ethanol industry, for example, heavily based in Iowa, you got to admit, won't that hurt his effectiveness inside the administration? It'll look like he's being parochial here? What can he do for Iowa?
You know, I can't guess on the dynamics with inside the cabinet, but I can think a little bit about how that works politically across the country if Tom Vilsack steps up and defends ethanol. I think that'll help the cabinet to support ethanol. It'll help President Obama support ethanol. I think he'll have that voice of credibility, and we must have it. It's ethanol, especially corn ethanol, is under assault across the country today, and there are a lot of people that think that they have a voice of authority and knowledge, and truthfully, they only know a bumper sticker.
Well, what about ethanol from sugarcane, Congressman? Why don't we get rid of that tariff?
Well, we set up a 54-cent tariff on Brazilian ethanol so that we would see the infrastructure investment dollars going into the United States rather than Brazil. I looked those people in the eye. They asked for $8 billion of your tax money, Dave, and I told them no.
Aren't you a good free market Republican? What happened to that?
I am. Let's build the infrastructure, and then we'll get to the market.
And Congressman, do you think that he will continue the traditional farm subsidies that have been part of farm legislation for a long time, and should he?
I think that there's a reasonable chance that that will happen. And from my standpoint, we've had the farm subsidies since clear back in the 30s. It's there. I will say that the blender's credit on ethanol, which has, if you want to argue that it's food versus fuel, it has saved the taxpayers billions of dollars because it eliminated the requirement for countercyclicals and LDPs. I think that knowing the politics in the House where the bill would start, I think we'll see farm subsidies, and they're always going to be expanding to specialty crops and out to California, the things they raise out there. So it's not going to go the other way once the people that raise fruits and nuts are getting their subsidy.
Congressman, I want to shift our focus now to another crisis, or crises, and that is Afghanistan, Iran, and Iraq. First of all, look at Iraq. Has our intervention there been successful?
Absolutely it has. I've made 6 trips into Iraq, and from the earliest times through the darkest times, and then now the last trip was just after Labor Day. And I have drafted a resolution that defines those events and takes us to a conclusion that we have achieved a definable victory in Iraq. And it's something that's to the credit of all of our men and women, their patriotism, their courage, their nobility, including our commander-in-chief, who made a very tough decision in the face of some advice that went the other way. And so I'll say today we have a definable victory in Iraq. Since the first day of July, we have lost more Americans there to accidents than we have the enemy, and 17 of 18 benchmarks have been completely or substantially achieved. So I think that now it's time to call upon President Obama to preserve the achievements there in Iraq and let history decide whether he's able to maintain the achievement of a definable victory in Iraq.
Tell me what he has to do then. You said it's time for him to define and take into consideration the victories we have. How does he do that?
Well,
is it time to pull
first, he's got to refrain from, and he said, responsible withdrawal. And I'll agree with that language. He's got to refrain from an irresponsible withdrawal from Iraq, and it's got to be timed. It's got to be militarily, I'll say it, militarily approved. I mean, the president can call whatever shot he wants to call, but we need to have prudent advisors in Iraq that will make sure that those achievements on the ground in Iraq are maintained. And they just had a successful election there. There's still much at risk, and we need to do it in a carefully timed fashion. And plus, get them out of the cities, get them out of the line of fire. The bases there we paid for.
Congressman, step 2, Afghanistan. President Obama has suggested he's going to step up the effort in Afghanistan. I've heard the theory that Afghanistan is a more difficult task than Iraq ever was because of the terrain, because of a number of reasons. It's a tougher task. Should we be thinking about going into Afghanistan, and how tough a job is it?
Afghanistan is a very tough job. I have said from the first time there that we would be in Afghanistan longer than we'll be in Iraq. And I say that because Afghanistan is a lot closer to the Stone Age. There's problems there that have to do with a sanctuary and a sovereign nation that's next door. the Taliban and 7 or 8 other definable enemies, including Al-Qaeda, come in and out as our forces advance and withdraw. They are raising at least 90% of the poppies in the world are raised in Afghanistan. They have a gross domestic product that's equivalent to the beer made in Wisconsin. And that's $7.5 billion. $4 billion of it is the poppy trade. We have a lot to do there, and it's going to be complicated. It can't be done simply with military. It's going to take a broad approach to get this done, and we can't do it without the cooperation in Pakistan.
How long?
I don't know. I don't know what kind of calls are going to be made from the White House or the Pentagon. And I don't know that I could predict if I could make the calls. I don't think so. But it's going to be tough, and it will be a long time. And I don't think history leaves an example of an achievement in Afghanistan that we would like to say today would be our goal.
What makes you think the American people are ready to pay that price? Some people would say the price in Iraq was too great. What makes you think they're ready to pay a price even greater in Afghanistan in terms of treasure and blood?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know how that will be, except that President Bush made the commitment, and we went in and had a short-term, phenomenal achievement there with the Northern Alliance and that alliance with the Northern Alliance. And President Obama has campaigned on the need to be successful in Afghanistan, and he's made those comments about Pakistan. So I think there's going to be bipartisan support for a while. And I think as long as we're making progress and we understand that it takes 10 years to defeat an insurgency on average, I think the American people will stay with us.
15 seconds. Diplomacy in Iran.
I suppose they'll go ahead with that. I would sit back. I don't think it'll do us any good. The people that are there, Ahmadinejad, is made too many broad statements that tell me that negotiations are not going to change his mind.
You'd be harsh.
I would be strong, and I would be bold, and I would be doing some back channel negotiations in order to feel them out.
Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, Dean.
We'll have another edition of Iowa Press at the usual times next weekend. That's 7:30 Friday night, 11:30 Sunday morning. I hope you'll watch at that time. I'm Dean Borg, and thanks for joining us today.
Archive editions of Iowa Press can be accessed on the World Wide Web. Audio and video streaming is available, as are transcripts, at www.iptv.org.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Iowa Bankers Association for personal, business, and commercial needs. Iowa banks help Iowans reach their financial goals.
By Iowa's private colleges and universities, employing over 10,000 Iowans and enrolling 25% of the total Iowa higher education enrollment. More information is available at www.thinkindependently.com.
The Iowa Hospital Association, supporting the missions and visions of Iowa's 117 community hospitals. The Iowa Hospital Association. We care about Iowa's health.